Alright, let's talk about this mindfuck. The Killing of a Sacred Deer is the newest Yorgos Lanthimos directed film and stars Colin Farrell, Nicole Kidman, and the Dunkirk kid. One of the kids from Dunkirk. Yeah, that one. So, I was very much looking forward to seeing this movie. What the fuck? The Lobster was one of my favorite movies of last year. I loved that movie. I think it's one of the most original movies I've ever seen. Fun fact, the only time I've ever had to leave a theater to take a shit, because we ate at this really bad Mexican restaurant beforehand, and I felt it, and I had to leave twice. Anyway, not the point. And so I was very much looking forward to see what he would do next. And I'll answer everyone's question first, I guess. Is this movie as good as The Lobster? No. It's close, but it is not as good. It's still a very good movie, but it is not as good as The Lobster. That's not necessarily a major hit I have on it. It simply has more little issues than The Lobster, and one more, bigger issue that I had with it as a whole. But it is not in any way a bad movie. Yorgos, whatever the hell, has cemented himself as one of the most original directors in Hollywood, and that seems to come with the territory that he's one of the most demented minds in Hollywood right now, with Dogtooth and The Lobster, and now this. He's a pretty fucked up guy, I guess. Although, has anyone heard of what his next movie is? It's some biographical drama about a queen. I was like, what? Also, let me make something clear before I get into specifics about this movie. This review is not an analysis. This is a review. I'm not going to pretend like I understood the entirety of this movie on my first viewing, because I didn't. I don't think you're supposed to. And I'd like to see it a second time, but I'm a junior in high school, and I'm struggling to see movies for the first time right now. I'm not even going to be able to see Thor this Thursday, because I have a test on Friday, so if I'm able to get out to see it, great. Maybe I'll do something where I talk about what I thought of the meaning behind it. But for right now, this is just talking strictly quality of film, not this is what everything means, because I don't know. Although in that regard, this movie's a little more clear-cut than The Lobster, which is more like cliffhanger ending, and this is more there is a beginning, middle, and end, whatever. So the direction in this film is really great. Yorgos is not just one of the most creative minds in terms of plot and execution of plot, but visually he is a great director. He's got this great understanding of composition and framing, and everything looks great and has a meaning behind it. That's the movie's strongest suit, is that there's not one thing that doesn't end up really kind of adding up. Each scene will somehow, at some point, be linked back to tell you, hey, that was important for this reason. And that's always really cool, and I think a second viewing helps that. I saw this with somebody who had seen it before, and I had never seen it before. By the way, I didn't know anything going into this movie. I hadn't seen the trailer, I didn't know the plot, I knew Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman were in it, I knew the director, and I'd seen the poster. That was all I knew about this movie, because that's the same thing I knew about The Lobster, and that added to my experience tenfold. So I saw this with someone who had seen it before, and I could tell that they were looking for more things, and they said after the movie they did pick up on a few more things, and they understood the movie a little bit more, and I think it's definitely necessary to see this a second time at some point. But that's because it's intelligent. The movie is smartly crafted. Everything is building to a certain message or a certain takeaway, and whether or not you're entirely confident about what that message is on your first walk away, which you're probably not supposed to be, it's there. That's the point. That's what makes this movie, that's what sets it aside from a lot of other things coming out right now. All of the performances in this movie are really great, especially from the main three. Colin Farrell is fantastic in this movie. He's, yet again, another, I think, one of the most underrated actors around right now, up there with, Viggo Mortensen. He always shows off his best, even in the not-so-great movies. He's great in Minority Report, he's great in Saving Mr. Banks, he was great in The Lobster, he got a Golden Globe nomination for that, he's great in Bruges. I think people don't pay enough attention to Colin Farrell, and this movie shows why. He's excellent in this. Nicole Kidman is great, although I don't know how many of you guys watched Big Little Lies. I watched it recently, it's okay. she, man, either Hollywood needs to stop casting her in roles that are not Australian, or she needs to fucking figure out how to not sound Australian. It's not as prevalent in this. It happens a couple times, but in Big Little Lies, whoo-wee, she's supposed to be American, and like there's just this Australian dialect that's constantly coming out with these words, and it drives me insane. The Dunkirk kid is also really good. He gets to show his chops with dialogue, which isn't necessarily something that was given to him in Dunkirk. He had to be visual and more facial expression-wise, but he's given a chance to show that he can deliver lines in a sense that makes sense with the character, and he does a great job in this thing as well. He's the oddball out of all of these oddballs, and another talent that Yorgos has is world building and setting up these just strange and unusual things. This, I don't believe this is in the future. One of the things that you don't know is like where the hell this is, because everyone seems just as weird as everyone else. Like the Lobster is in the future, but this I don't know. It's just, everyone's just a fucking weirdo. But they established that so well to the point where you're like, oh, it's not just them that's like this. Everybody is like this. And then so when you get those moments of humanity that come out of the performances or the writing, they almost stand out even more, and they're almost that much more powerful because of how well it was set up previously. That's how important it can be to set up certain elements of a film and then to be able to give you that kicker later on in the movie and have those scenes and lines of dialogue and moments of performances stand out even more than they could have if there was a lack of setup. Technically, this movie is very, very good. It looks great. The production design is great. The cinematography is great. I really like the editing of this movie. I like how it's pieced together. The opening scene sets up the tone really, really well, and it's probably going to turn a lot of lighthearted or weak-at-stomach viewers off of watching the rest of the movie. The lighting is great. The lighting always reflects something or shows something that's going on. The score is great. I'm noticing more and more as movies come out, certain scores are just becoming like loud blaring noises at the audience, like Blade Runner 2049, which works for these kinds of movies. That's sort of the sense you're supposed to take away from the movie, because the other thing about this film is its tone and its style. It's very consistent the whole way through. You're always sort of feeling uneasy, and you have this like, what the fuck question going on in your head, and that's how you're supposed to feel. That's what you're supposed to take away from this movie, and that's you do. It never lets up. It's never like, oh, this scene feels out of place with the rest of the movie. No, stylistically, the movie's flawless. It manages to be that way the entire movie, and whether it's bringing it to a new level or making it a little bit more low-key to focus on something else going on in that scene, that feeling of uneasiness is always there and somewhat prevalent, whether it's most prevalent in a certain scene of the film or least prevalent in another scene of the film. Speaking of style, I guess I'll kind of get into my problem with it, and this is like a debatable problem. This is probably just something that I had, but it was something that when I walked out of it, I had this issue. There are parts of this movie, primarily at the beginning, like towards the beginning, where it does feel slightly style over substance. Yes, there are things that are working to set up parts later in the movie, and it's setting up the relationship mainly between characters, but there are scenes where I felt as though there needed to be more substance. There needed to be more character or more dialogue that really added something to the scene that you were watching. A lot of it felt like Yorgos had this scene in his mind that he was like, man, this would feel really cool and look really cool, and it accomplishes both of those things, but it doesn't necessarily move the film forward in the way that it should. And that's what sets this movie behind The Lobster for me, is The Lobster has that style in every scene, but it always has a little bit more substance. Whether that's a benefit of the characters in that movie or just the overall writing in that movie, it's more prevalent there than it is here. The actual plot of this movie, like the real conflict, doesn't really start for like 45 minutes. Then you actually get into the meat of the story, but it doesn't like start until that point. And once you move on from there, that's when the movie's at its best. But before then, it all feels a little bit like, okay, we're obviously building to something, but I'd like to know a little more. I'd like to feel a little more. I'd like to understand a little more about what's happening and what's going on. There had to be a little more of that substance to elevate the film to the next level, to make it as good as The Lobster. But in my eyes, that's the one thing that was just barely holding it back. I love the ending of this movie. Overall, this is a very, very good movie. If you're gonna see it, which I recommend seeing it, know what you're getting into. I notice I say that a lot recently, but like, it's not as brutal as like Dogtooth, but there's some shit in it that's pretty rough and hard to watch. So just know that going in, I guess. Oscar-wise, if you're watching this video to hear me say stuff about that, will it show up? No, probably not. The Lobster showed up for Best Original Screenplay, and my thoughts, I think when I made my original early Oscar predictions video was, oh, maybe it'll show up in that category, but the writing is not as prevalent in this movie as it was in The Lobster, because The Lobster is more of a comedy film than this one is. It's not entirely a comedy, but there's a lot more comedy in The Lobster. This is more of a visual piece, and that does work really well for this movie, but like, I don't see it showing up in Best Director. Maybe some technical categories would be interesting to see, but even I kind of doubt that happening. I don't know. I just don't see this movie picking up the steam that it needs to, or really grabbing the attention of the Academy voters that it would. I just don't see that happening, unfortunately. Maybe like Golden Globe nominations, maybe. I doubt that, though. Even then, I don't think that would happen, so I don't know. I'd still recommend getting out to see it. It's probably one of the most original movies you'll see all year. It's fucking crazy. It's wacky. It's very out there. Yeah. In terms of more reviews, I'm going to try and see 3 movies this weekend. I'm going to try and see Thor Friday night, because I can't see it Thursday. I'm going to try and see Lady Bird on Saturday and Last Flag Flying on Sunday, and then try and get all those reviews up on those days. So keep an eye out for those if you're interested in seeing my thoughts on those. Obviously, Thor isn't like an Oscar contender, but Lady Bird definitely is, and Last Flag Flying is shaky, just from what I've heard about it. Anyway, what did you guys think? Have you seen The Killing of a Sacred Deer? Have you not seen The Killing of a Sacred Deer? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.